start it later. For now, most discussions on education are about students and adults. But what about the smaller kids? How much of their worlds changed during the pandemic? Mercedes Mayon-Lassalle, the president of OMEP, which is the World Organization for Preschool Education, is going to tell us about the changes in pre-primary education during COVID and how hard it was to adjust the system to make it more comfortable and easy for our little citizens to continue getting an education that they have every right to get.
My name is Mercedes Mayon-Lassalle and I have been the world president of OMEP since January 1st, 2020. I have a degree in educational sciences at the University of Buenos Aires. Nowadays, I am a professor at that university and in the International Institute of Education and Planning of UNESCO. I am part of the team of the coordination group of the collective consultation in NGO on Education 2030. I have been working in OMEP for more than 20 years. This NGO was founded in 1948 and defends and promotes the human rights of children, emphasizing education from birth to 8 years. OMEP brings together activists and educators for 70 countries and has special consultative status in United Nations. I joined OMEP because I feel identified with its aims, its humanistic perspective, the defense of human rights, and the struggle for quality education and care for all. It has been only 14 months since I assumed the OMEP World Presidency. I knew that despite having capitalized on a lot of experience in my previous 6 years as Regional Vice President for Latin America, this position would involve taking on new and profound challenges. However, I could never foresee that on March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization was going to declare the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic, and that the global society and the world would be radically transformed. For contemporary generations, the experience of the pandemic has been and continues to be an unprecedented and almost incredible event. The pandemic affected us head-on, defining the content and meaning of all our actions and concerns, and it continues to do so since we still do not know when it will end. We are living critical years that will mark humanity in many ways. In addition to the infections and the large number of losses, the pandemic is provoking devastating effects on countries' economies, public health, food supplies, and social ties for billions of people. We have regressed in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, in reducing poverty, inequalities, environmental degradation, discrimination against women and girls, and in decreasing the risk to the well-being and development of our children. The pandemic came to disarm our expectations and certainties that seemed stable and questionable, and excited us with a constant progress despite the problems. For me as a person and as OMEP World President, it has been a challenge in which I have tried to be more OMEPian than ever. What does this mean? It implies keeping a cool head and a warm heart, maintaining a political and pedagogical perspective, betting on hope and believing in work, trusting in solidarity and ethic. I decided as an OMEPian that we are not going to stand still in the face of adversity. But what is the situation of the youngest children in the pandemic? As we know, The COVID-19 pandemic forced education and social protection systems to close their doors, impacted an unprecedented number of young children and students of all ages around the world. For infants and young children, not accessing to early childhood education and care services have amplified inequalities, fears, suffering, and confusion. Changes in the daily habits, reduction of the contact with grandparents and other family members, confinement, lack of play with other children, masked people, excessive exposure to screens, all have inextricable consequences for child's mental, physical health and development. What structural problems did the pandemic reveal? I will only refer to some of them. First, the huge and outrageous inequalities, not only regarding the economy, but also social, cultural, age and gender inequalities. Secondly, the weakness of the state capacities to protect the population. We can see it in the collapse of many public health systems and in the limited responses of education or social protection systems. Third, the digital divide. Maintaining the continuity of learning and bonds between children, teachers, and caregivers was particularly difficult, given the huge inequalities of access to technological devices and internet or cell connections. In addition, during childhood, children require contact for communication, playing and learning body to body. They need real presence of children and adults. Therefore, as a society, we must be aware that we still do not understand what dimension of the impact will be, nor do we know what young children have learned or stopped learning. If we revise the decisions taken, the social and political visibility of early childhood citizenship is still a challenge for the well-being and the development of children. Many of the government's resolutions and the recommendation of the main world organizations were taken in emergency, but without the participation of children and families, and without the consideration of their huge diversities and inequalities. OMEP developed multiple strategies to make visible the different ways of experiencing childhood and the need to adjust responses through political advocacy, advising governments, working together with UNESCO and the UN, developing protocols, training educators, supporting families. We want that young children's rights could be considered in the public policies and the assumption of states' responsibilities. Children are citizens, have the right to be heard and have a strong voice. Even babies can express their feelings, mood, longings, if given the possibility. One truthful summary of the experience of pandemic was made by a boy from Michigan, USA, to the Washington Post. And he said that the situation was like looking both ways before crossing the street and then getting hit by a submarine. What about early childhood rights to education and care? Well, the voices of OMEP were rights demanding for inclusive, equitable, and quality education and care for all. I am persuaded that education is a human right, a public good, but education is also a tool for the achievement of all other rights. we must be vigilant that early childhood pedagogical approaches are appropriate and relevant. The same responses for primary school cannot be applied in this case. Neither should we allow abusive use of screens because it has negative consequences on development. Technological strategies should rather be used to guide, to inform families and expand their cultural and educational resources for the improvement of upbringing and access to opportunities of play, arts, culture, natural life. In summary, I want to share with you this message. In order to guarantee and realize the right of young children, we cannot consider a return to normality. We must redouble our efforts to create a new reality for children. We must capitalize on what we have learned during these months, assuming responsibilities and advocating for the protection of the human rights of children from birth, as established in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. For this reason, as OMEP World President, I ethically assume my responsibility towards each child, making efforts to strengthen in each national committee and member the hope and the commitment necessary to help building a fair world for all children, while collaborating in the construction of an inclusive, equitable, and quality education, leaving no one behind.